The scream came first before the light, before the sweat cooling on his skin, before the realization that he was no longer in that parking lot but lying in his bed in Oceanside, California, staring at a ceiling he had memorized across 3 years of restless nights. Daniel Hawkins sat upright, his chest heaving, his hands gripping the sheets as though they were the only thing anchoring him to the present moment. The digital clock on his nightstand glowed a merciless 3:47 a.m., its red numbers casting strange shadows across the wall where a photograph of his late wife still hung, her smile frozen in a moment when everything had been whole. The dream had been the same one that had plagued him for 5 consecutive nights now, ever since that Tuesday afternoon when the world had tilted on its axis and refused to right itself. He could still hear the voice, small and terrified and impossibly brave, cutting through the chaos of memory like a blade through fog. "Daddy, please help her." 4 words that had changed everything. 4 words spoken by a 7-year-old girl who had no idea what she was asking, who had looked up at her father with the absolute certainty that he could fix anything, save anyone, move mountains if necessary. Daniel swung his legs over the edge of the bed, his left knee protesting with the familiar ache that had ended his career and rerouted the course of his life. The doctors at Balboa Naval Medical Center had used words like irreparable and permanent and were sorry, and he had nodded through all of it because what else could you do when they told you that the thing you had built your entire identity around was no longer possible? 12 years as a Navy SEAL, 3 combat deployments, more missions than he could count, and it had all ended not in some heroic last stand, but in a training accident, a parachute that opened 3 seconds too late, a landing that shattered cartilage and tore ligaments, and left him with a medical discharge and a monthly disability check that felt more like charity than compensation. He stood testing the knee, feeling the grind of bone against bone that no amount of physical therapy had been able to fix. The house was silent around him, the kind of silence that pressed against your eardrums and made you hyper-aware of every creak and settle of the old foundation. It was a modest place, 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms in a neighborhood where military families came to raise children and retired veterans came to fade quietly into civilian life. He had bought it after Rachel died, selling the larger house they had shared in San Diego, because every room there had contained her ghost, and he could not bear to watch their daughter grow up surrounded by the absence of her mother. Rachel, even now, 4 years later, the thought of her name sent a sharp pain through his chest that had nothing to do with physical injury. She had been driving home from work when a teenager running a red light had ended everything in a screech of metal and a shattering of glass. Daniel had been on the other side of the world at the time, deep in the mountains of Afghanistan, on an operation he could never talk about. And by the time he had received word and fought his way through military bureaucracy to get home, his wife had been in the ground for 3 days and his daughter had been staying with neighbors who looked at him with pity and relief in equal measure. He walked down the hallway, now his feet finding the path they had traced thousands of times before stopping at the door to Lily's room. He pushed it open slowly, carefully, and stood in the threshold watching his daughter sleep. She was curled on her side, one arm wrapped around the stuffed unicorn he had bought her 5 days ago, just before everything changed. Her blonde hair spread across the pillow like spilled sunlight, and in the glow of the star-shaped nightlight she had begged him for last Christmas, she looked so much like Rachel that it made his throat constrict. 7 years old, that was all she was. 7 years of life, 4 of them, without a mother, and now she had witnessed her father put 3 men in the hospital with his bare hands. Daniel leaned against the doorframe, watching her breathe, and tried to reconcile the peace of this moment with the chaos that had preceded it. 5 days ago, he had been an ordinary father picking up school supplies at Target. 5 days ago, his biggest concern had been whether Lily would finish her homework before bedtime. 5 days ago, he had believed that he could leave the violence of his past behind and build something quiet and safe for his daughter. 5 days ago, he had been wrong. The memory came unbidden, as it had every night since, playing across his mind with the vivid clarity of a film he could not pause or rewind or turn off. It had been a Tuesday. That detail seemed absurdly mundane given everything that followed, but he remembered it because Tuesdays were early dismissal days at Jefferson Elementary, which meant he had picked Lily up at 2:30 instead of the usual 3:15, and they had decided to swing by Target on the way home because she needed new crayons and he needed to feel like a competent father who could manage basic school supply requirements. The October sun had still been bright at 4:30 in the afternoon, hanging low on the western horizon and painting the parking lot of Oceanside Gateway Shopping Center in shades of gold and amber that belonged in a travel brochure rather than a crime scene. Daniel had walked out of the store carrying two shopping bags and holding his daughter's hand. He was 39 years old, built like the middleweight fighter he had trained to be during his years in the teams, carrying lean muscle and old scars beneath the faded jeans and gray-fitted t-shirt that had become his civilian uniform. His dark hair was cut military short, the only vanity he still maintained, and the gray at his temples had started appearing the year Rachel died and had spread steadily since. His face was weathered in the way that faces become weathered when they have spent years in deserts and mountains and places that existed only on classified maps. And his eyes, the pale gray of winter storm clouds, were always watching, always assessing, even when he was doing something as mundane as buying crayons with his daughter. Lily had been skipping beside him, clutching the stuffed unicorn she had somehow convinced him to buy, despite his half-hearted protests about not rewarding good behavior with toys. She had a gift for that, his daughter, for making him forget the rules he had set for himself and agree to things he had sworn he would never agree to. It was the same gift Rachel had possessed, the ability to look at him with those blue eyes and make him feel like refusing her anything would be a crime against the natural order of the universe. "Daddy, can we get ice cream on the way home?" Her voice had been bright with hope and afternoon sunshine, and the absolute certainty that the answer would eventually be yes, even if it started as no. "It's still pretty early, bug." Daniel had checked his watch, maintaining the pretense of parental authority, even as he felt his resolve weakening. "We need to get home and start dinner. You've got homework, remember? But it's so hot. Please, just a little one." He had smiled down at her, opened his mouth to deliver some compromise about maybe getting ice cream after dinner if she finished her homework without complaint, and then he had heard it. The sound that did not belong. A woman's voice, sharp and frightened, cutting through the ordinary noises of the parking lot, and then stopping abruptly as though someone had pressed a hand over her mouth or done something worse to silence her. Daniel's body had reacted before his conscious mind could catch up. His head snapped toward the source of the sound, his posture shifting from relaxed civilian to combat-ready in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Everything around him seemed to slow down and sharpen simultaneously, a perceptual shift he recognized from 100 operations, where the difference between life and death came down to milliseconds and micro-decisions. Across the parking lot, maybe 60 yards away, in a section partially obscured by two large SUVs, he saw them. Three men and one woman. A dark blue panel van with California plates. The woman was young, mid-20s, dressed in business casual that suggested office work rather than shopping, and one of the men had her by the arm, while another pushed her from behind and a third stood guard near the driver's door, scanning the parking lot with the professional wariness of someone who had done this before. Daniel's brain processed the scene in fractions of seconds, cataloging details with the automatic precision of years of training. Abduction in progress. The woman was fighting, trying to pull away, but she was outmatched and overpowered. The positioning of the larger vehicles created a visual barrier that blocked most of the parking lot from seeing what was happening. It was a smart setup, the kind of location you chose when you had done this before and knew how to minimize witnesses. His first instinct was operator instinct, pure and muscle deep. Assess the threats, make a plan, execute with prejudice. His second instinct, the one that came slower but hit harder, was father instinct. You have your daughter with you. This is not your fight. Call 911 and keep Lily safe. He had pulled out his phone and dialed. The call connected immediately, and he started relaying information in the clipped, precise cadence of someone accustomed to communication under pressure. Location. Number of suspects. Description of vehicle. License plate number that his eyes had automatically memorized before he consciously decided to memorize it. Then the woman had screamed again, and then Lily had seen what was happening. Daddy. His daughter's voice had risen to a register that cut through everything else, high and terrified and impossible to ignore. Daddy, that man has a knife. Daniel's eyes snapped back to the scene. One of the men, the one holding the woman's arm, had produced a folding knife and was pressing it against her ribs. The woman had gone rigid, her resistance collapsing into the frozen terror of someone who understood that struggling would now get her killed. The 911 operator was speaking in his ear, telling him that officers were en route with an estimated arrival time of 6 minutes, and that he should not engage and should stay on the line and should remain at a safe distance. 6 minutes. Daniel had looked at the scene, looked at the woman, looked at the knife. In 6 minutes, that van would be gone, and so would she, swallowed into whatever nightmare awaited women who were taken by men like these. He knew what that nightmare looked like. He had seen it during his time in Afghanistan, and Iraq had liberated some women from it and found the bodies of others who had not survived long enough to be liberated. He knew what happened in the dark places of the world where people were treated as merchandise. But he had Lily. His daughter was standing right there, her small hand gripping her eyes wide with fear, the stuffed unicorn pressed against her chest like a talisman against evil. He could not put her at risk. He could not leave her alone in a parking lot while he ran toward violence. He was not an operator anymore. He was a father, and fathers protected their children above all else. And then Lily had said the words that would echo in his dreams for years to come. Daddy. Her voice had been shaking, but beneath the fear there was something else, something that sounded almost like conviction. Please help her. Daniel had looked down at his daughter. She was not looking at him with the expectation that he would explain why they could not help, why the right thing to do was stay safe and wait for the police. She was looking at him with the pure, uncomplicated certainty that of course he would help because he was her father, and fathers helped people who needed help, and that was simply how the world worked. In that moment, Daniel understood something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. If he turned away from this, if he let that woman disappear into that van while his daughter watched, something in Lily would break. Not her faith in him specifically, but her faith in the fundamental idea that the world contained people who would stand up when standing up mattered. At 7 years old, she still believed in heroes. She still believed that good people did good things, and if he failed to act, she would learn a different lesson. She would learn that you looked away when looking was hard. She would learn that safety was more important than courage. She would learn that the screams of strangers were not your problem. Some lessons once learned could never be unlearned. Daniel had knelt down, bringing himself to his daughter's eye level opening. His voice was calm and steady, the same voice he had used to reassure teammates in firefights and hostages in rescue operations, and himself in the dark moments when calm and steady were the only things standing between him and dissolution. Bug, I need you to listen to me very carefully. See that lady over there? He had pointed at a middle-aged woman loading groceries into her car about 20 yards away. I need you to run to her right now and stay with her. Do not move until I come get you. Understand? Lily's eyes had filled with tears. Daddy, what are you going to, Lily? He had used her real name, the name he only used when he needed her to understand that this was serious. Go now, baby. Run. She had run. He had watched her for just a second, watched her blonde hair streaming behind her as she sprinted toward the woman with the groceries. And then he had turned and started walking toward the van. The phone had gone on the ground, still connected to 911, still recording everything that happened next. Daniel had covered the 60 yards in approximately 20 seconds, moving fast but not running, using parked cars as visual cover, approaching from an angle that kept him in the blind spot of the man standing lookout. His body had shifted into a mode it had not inhabited in 3 years, a cold and focused state where fear was not eliminated but compartmentalized, packed away in a corner of his mind where it could not interfere with the work that needed to be done. The men did not see him coming until it was too late. He had assessed the threats as he closed the distance. The lookout was the first priority because the lookout had his hand near his waistband, suggesting a concealed weapon, and the lookout would be the first to spot him approaching. The man with the knife was the primary threat to the victim. The third man was unconfirmed in terms of weapons, but was currently occupied with controlling the woman. Daniel had closed to within 10 feet before the lookout noticed him. The man's head had turned, his eyes widening with surprise that shifted quickly to suspicion. Hey man, you lost. The lookout's voice had carried false friendliness over real aggression, the tone of someone testing whether the approaching stranger was a threat or simply a confused civilian who had wandered into the wrong part of the parking lot. Daniel had not answered. He had not slowed down. He had simply walked straight at the man with the focused inevitability of someone who had made a decision and was now executing it. The lookout's hand had moved toward his waistband, reaching for what was almost certainly a gun. He had not been fast enough. Daniel's left hand had shot out, capturing the man's right wrist before the weapon could clear trapping the arm against the man's body and neutralizing the threat before it could materialize. His right hand had come up in a palm strike to the chin, not a punch because punches broke knuckles, but a heel of palm blow designed to transfer maximum force to the skull. The lookout's head had snapped back. Before recovery was possible, Daniel had pivoted using the man's compromised balance against him and driven his knee into the outside of the lookout's knee joint. The man had gone down hard, his head bouncing off the side panel of the van with a sound like a drum being struck. He had not gotten back up. 3 seconds. The man in the hoodie had reacted faster than expected. He had released the woman and charged hands, reaching for Daniel's throat in a move that spoke of street fighting experience, but not professional training. Daniel had sidestepped, grabbed the incoming arm at the wrist, and executed a textbook sacrifice throw that used the attacker's own momentum to drive him face first into the asphalt. The impact had been substantial. The man's back had hit the ground with a sound that made nearby pigeons scatter, and Daniel had followed him down, dropping a knee onto his solar plexus with enough force to expel every molecule of air from his lungs. The man's eyes had rolled back. He had not gotten back up either. 8 seconds total. That had left the man with the knife. He had finally processed what was happening and shoved the woman away from him, sending her stumbling to her knees on the rough pavement. He had turned toward Daniel with the knife held low in a grip that suggested prison experience, blade angled upward for gutting thrusts rather than slashing attacks. Big mistake, hero. The man had snarled the words, his eyes wild with adrenaline, and the dawning realization that this was not going the way it was supposed to go. Daniel had not responded. Words were wasted energy in a fight. He had simply watched the knife, waiting for the attack that he knew would come. It had come fast, a straight thrust toward his midsection, aimed to open him up from hip to sternum. Daniel's hand had blurred, catching the man's wrist mid-thrust and redirecting the blade away from his body. He had twisted hard and fast, applying a standing wrist lock that forced the knife to drop. Before it could hit the ground, his elbow had connected with the man's face in a strike that shattered cartilage and sprayed blood across the side of the van. The man had staggered backward, both hands going to his ruined nose. Daniel had followed, swept his legs, and driven him face first into the side of the van with a controlled violence that walked the line between incapacitation and permanent damage. The man had crumpled. He had not gotten back up. 15 seconds total. Daniel had stood there in the aftermath, breathing hard, but controlled his hands, shaking with the post-adrenaline dump that always followed close combat. 3 unconscious men. 1 terrified woman still kneeling on the ground. 1 knife on the asphalt. 1 gun half drawn from a waistband. And somewhere behind him, his 7-year-old daughter watching from a safe distance. The woman had been staring at him with eyes that could not decide whether he was a savior or something equally terrifying as the men who had tried to take her. "You okay?" Daniel had asked, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. She had nodded, unable to speak. "Stay down. Police are coming." And then he had walked back to his daughter, who had broken away from the confused grocery-loading woman, and run to meet him halfway, crashing into his arms with a force that seemed impossible from such a small body. "Daddy," she had sobbed the word into his chest, her entire body shaking. "Daddy. Daddy, Daddy, I'm okay, Bug. I'm okay." He had held her tight, and his own hands had been shaking too, not from fear, but from the realization of what he had just done, what he had just risked, what could have gone wrong in 1,000 different ways. Behind them, sirens had begun to wail in the distance, growing closer. Several shoppers had finally noticed the commotion and were standing at various distances, some filming with their phones, others making their own 911 calls. The afternoon sun had cast everything in the stark clarity of a crime scene photograph, every detail visible and inescapable. Daniel had held his daughter and waited for the police and wondered if he had just made the best decision of his life or the worst. That had been 5 days ago. Now, standing in the doorway of Lily's room at nearly 4 in the morning, Daniel was still wondering. The police had taken statements for hours. He had sat in the back of a patrol car with Lily asleep on his lap, answering questions from detectives who seemed simultaneously impressed and disturbed by what he had done. He had kept his explanations simple and factual, leaving out the parts about SEAL training and combat experience, presenting himself as simply a concerned citizen who had gotten lucky. A detective named Frank Morrison, A grizzled veteran with the weary eyes of someone who had seen too much to be surprised by anything had sat with him at one point. That was some serious work you did out there, Mr. Hawkins. Ex-military Navy. Daniel had kept it vague. Morrison had nodded knowingly. SEAL Daniel had not answered, which was answer enough. Well, you did good. That woman would be dead or worse if you hadn't stepped in. Morrison had paused. But you know, you got lucky right, 3-on-1 with a knife in play, and your kid nearby. That could have gone sideways real fast. I know. Daniel had looked down at Lily's sleeping face. Believe me, I know. They had let him go around 7 that evening. He had carried Lily to his truck, driven home in silence, and spent the next hours sitting on the edge of her bed watching her sleep. The woman he had saved, her name was Lieutenant Catherine Sterling, a Navy intelligence officer stationed at Naval Base San Diego. She had given her statement separately and been taken away by people who seemed very interested in the circumstances of her near abduction. The 3 attackers had been arrested and taken to the hospital under guard 2 with concussions and 1 with a broken nose and fractured wrist. All 3 would survive to face charges. That should have been the end of it. A random act of violence interrupted by a random act of courage. A story for the local news that would be forgotten in a week. A few nightmares for Daniel, and hopefully none for Lily, and then life would go back to normal. But that was not how things had worked out. The knock on his front door had come at 8:30 the next morning, and nothing had been normal since. Daniel stepped back from Lily's doorway, now pulling the door closed with a soft click. The memory of that knock was vivid in his mind, the 3 sharp raps that had carried an authority he recognized from years of military service. He had looked through the peephole and felt his stomach drop. A man in navy dress blues, a chest full of ribbons, 2 silver stars on each shoulder, a rear admiral. Daniel had opened the door slowly. "Can I help you, sir?" He had asked the question even though he already knew on some level that help was not what this visit was about. The admiral had been in his late 50s, whole and fit, with iron gray hair, and the bearing of someone who had spent decades in command of men and ships and operations that shaped the world without the world ever knowing. His name tag had read RADM Sterling, and the realization had hit Daniel immediately. The woman he had saved was this man's daughter, Chief Petty Officer Hawkins. The admiral's voice had been formal but not unfriendly. "May I come in?" Daniel had blinked at the use of his former rank. "Sir, I'm retired. It's just Dan now. Once a SEAL, always a SEAL. Chief, may I come in?" Daniel had stepped aside. The admiral had entered, his eyes quickly scanning the modest living room with the automatic assessment of someone trained to absorb information rapidly. The worn couch, the coffee table covered in Lily's coloring books, the framed photographs on the mantel showing Daniel in uniform with his team at his wedding with Rachel holding Lily as a newborn. Lily had peeked around the corner from the kitchen where Daniel had been making her pancakes. "Daddy, who's that?" Her voice had carried the suspicious curiosity of a child confronted with an unexpected adult. "Go finish your breakfast, Bug. I'll be there in a minute." She had disappeared back into the kitchen, and Admiral Sterling had turned to face Daniel. "Chief, I'm here because of what happened yesterday afternoon. The woman you saved, Lieutenant Catherine Sterling, is my daughter." Daniel had nodded slowly. "I figured, sir. I'm glad she's okay. She is okay because of you." The Admiral's voice had softened slightly. "I read the police report this morning. I also pulled your service record. SEAL Team 5, 12 years active duty, 3 combat deployments. Navy Cross, 2 Silver Stars, Purple Heart. Medically retired 3 years ago due to injuries sustained during training." Daniel's jaw had tightened at the casual recitation of his military history. "Sir, with respect, why are you here?" And then Admiral Sterling had said the words that changed everything. "Those 3 men you put in the hospital yesterday, they're not random criminals. They're part of a human trafficking ring that's been operating out of San Diego for the past 2 years. We've been tracking them. NCIS, FBI, local police. They've taken at least 7 women that we know of. None of them have been found." Daniel had felt something cold settle in his chest. "You're saying your daughter was targeted?" "Yes. She works in naval intelligence. She's been part of the task force investigating this ring. Somehow they identified her. Yesterday was an attempted kidnapping, but it was also a message." The Admiral's eyes had hardened. "We can get to you." That was the message. Daniel had processed this information, feeling the pieces click together in a pattern that was far more sinister than he had imagined. You stopped them. And in doing so, you gave us something we didn't have before. 3 suspects in custody who are looking at 25 years to life. They're already starting to talk. Because of you, we're about to break this whole thing open. There had been a long pause. Daniel had waited for the other shoe to drop because there was always another shoe. Chief the Admiral had continued, I came here for 2 reasons. The first is to thank you personally for saving my daughter's life. If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't acted, his voice had cracked slightly, and in that moment, Daniel had seen past the rank and the ribbons to the father underneath, to the man who had almost lost his child and was still grappling with that near miss. I'm glad I could help, sir. Daniel had meant it. Whatever else this conversation held, that part was true. The second reason is more complicated. Admiral Sterling had reached into his uniform jacket and produced a business card. I want to offer you a job. And there it was, the other shoe. Daniel had listened as the Admiral laid out the situation. The trafficking ring, which they called the network, was sophisticated and well organized. They had evaded law enforcement for 2 years. The 3 men Daniel had captured were low-level operatives who knew very little about the larger organization. But they had given up one name, Viktor Kozlov. Kozlov was a Russian businessman who had arrived in America in 1999 after the collapse of the Soviet Union. On paper, he was the owner of a successful seafood import company based in San Diego. In reality, according to intelligence that the task force had gathered, he was the head of the network, or at least one of its senior leaders. The problem was proof. Kozlov was careful. He never directly involved himself in illegal activities. He had excellent lawyers and connections in local government. Building a case against him through conventional investigation had proven nearly impossible. What Admiral Sterling was proposing was something different. He wanted Daniel to go undercover using his background as a retired SEAL and his new notoriety from the parking lot incident to establish himself as someone Kozlov might want to recruit. The idea was to get inside the organization, gather evidence, and help bring the whole thing down. The offer was a 6-month contract. The pay was $180,000 plus benefits. The work would be coordinated with NCIS and FBI, but kept strictly confidential to minimize the risk of leaks. Daniel had asked the obvious question, why me? You have trained undercover agents. Because Kozlov will recognize trained agents. The Admiral's response had been immediate. He has contacts everywhere. Federal agents have files and records that can be traced. You're different. You're a retired SEAL who got in a fight in a parking lot. There's no investigation in your background because there's nothing to investigate. You're clean, and if I refuse, then you go back to your life and hope the network forgets about you. But you don't think they will. The Admiral had looked at Daniel with the unflinching directness of a man who had made hard decisions for decades and was not about to soften his words now. You put 3 of their men in the hospital. You saved a task force member who's been investigating them. You're on their radar now, Chief, whether you want to be or not. The question is whether you're going to sit and wait for them to come to you or whether you're going to help us take them down first. Daniel had looked toward the kitchen where he could hear Lily humming softly to herself as she ate her pancakes. I need time to think about it. You have 48 hours, Admiral Sterling had stood. My number is on the card. Call me when you decide. He had walked to the door, then paused. One more thing, Chief. My daughter wanted me to give you this. He had handed Daniel a folded piece of paper, then left. Daniel had stood alone in his living room, holding the note and the business card, feeling the weight of a choice he had not asked for pressing down on his shoulders. He had unfolded the note and read it. Thank you for saving my life. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there. My father told me you have a daughter. I hope she knows how lucky she is to have a dad like you. If there's ever anything I can do for you, please don't hesitate to ask. You're a hero. Kate Daniel had stared at those words for a long time. He was not a hero. Heroes were characters in stories, people who made the right choice without hesitation and never had to live with the consequences. He was just a man who had made a split-second decision in a parking lot and was now facing the ripples of that decision spreading outward into his life. That had been 4 days ago. He had spent those 4 days thinking, analyzing, second-guessing himself in ways that felt both necessary and exhausting. The 48-hour deadline had come and gone, and he had called Admiral Sterling to ask for more time. The Admiral had granted it because what choice did he have? But Daniel could hear the impatience beneath the professional courtesy. Now at nearly 4 in the morning, standing in his dark kitchen, With a glass of water he did not remember pouring, Daniel was no closer to a decision than he had been on that first day. His phone buzzed on the counter, a text message from a number he did not recognize. "We know where your daughter goes to school. We know what time she gets out. We know the route you take home. The choice you make in the next 24 hours will determine whether she stays safe. Choose wisely." Daniel read the message 3 times. Then he picked up the phone and called the number on Admiral Sterling's business card. "Sir, it's Daniel Hawkins." His voice was flat, all emotion pressed down into a place where it could not interfere with what needed to be done. "I'm in, but I need your people watching Lily starting right now." The Admiral's response was immediate and businesslike. "Already done, Chief. I had a protection detail on her the moment I left your house. I was waiting for you to catch up." Daniel felt a flash of anger at the presumption, then a grudging respect for the foresight. "There's been a development," he continued and read the text message aloud. "Kozlov's people." The Admiral's voice hardened. "They're pressuring you to stay quiet. They're threatening my daughter, which is exactly why you need to help us take them down. As long as Kozlov is operational, neither you nor Lily is safe. You understand that now." Daniel did understand. He had understood since the moment he read that message. The fantasy of returning to normal life had evaporated with those cold, precise words about school pickup times and routes home. "What happens next? You meet with the task force tomorrow morning. 0800 Naval Base, San Diego. I'll text you the location. From now until this is over, you are working with us. One condition." The Admiral paused. "Go ahead. If anything happens to me, you make sure Lily is taken care of. Education, living expenses, everything. She doesn't end up in the system." There was a moment of silence on the line. When Sterling spoke again, his voice carried a weight that went beyond professional obligation. "You have my word, Chief. Lily will be protected as if she were my own grandchild." "Thank you, sir." Daniel ended the call and stood in his dark kitchen, looking out the window at the street beyond. Somewhere out there, Admiral Sterling's protection detail was watching his house. Somewhere else, Kozlov's people were watching too, probably. The quiet neighborhood where he had tried to build a peaceful life had become a battlefield, and he was standing in the middle of it. His father would have known what to do. The thought came unbidden, as thoughts about his father often did in moments of crisis. William Hawkins had served 2 tours in Vietnam, had come home with shrapnel in his leg, and nightmares that never fully faded, had spent the rest of his life working as a carpenter and raising his son with a set of values that were as sturdy as the furniture he built. Daniel walked to the living room and picked up a photograph from the mantel. It showed him at age 18 standing next to his father on the day he had left for basic training. His father had been 52. Then his face lined and weathered his eyes, holding a mixture of pride and fear that Daniel had not fully understood until he became a father himself. William Hawkins had died 6 years ago, a heart attack that had come sudden and final while he was working in his shop, his hands still holding the chisel he had been using to carve a rocking chair for Lily. He had never gotten to see his granddaughter's first steps or hear her first words. He had never gotten to teach her how to fish the way he had taught Daniel. He had left behind a workshop full of unfinished projects in a letter that Daniel had found in his desk drawer 2 weeks after the funeral. Daniel had read that letter once on the night he found it and then had put it away in his own desk without ever reading it again. He knew what it said. The words were burned into his memory. But he had not been able to face them. Not while Rachel was dying and his career was ending and his whole life was falling apart. Now standing in his living room at 4 in the morning with a choice before him that felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, he walked to his desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out the envelope. The paper was yellowed slightly, the handwriting his father's careful cursive that had never changed from the day he learned it in elementary school until the day he died. "Son," the letter began, "if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I won't be there to see you grow old and gray and probably still stubborn as a mule. But there's something I need to tell you, something I should have said when I was alive, but never found the right words for." Daniel's throat tightened as he read. "I spent my whole life worrying about you. From the minute you were born, I worried. When you decided to join the Navy, I worried. When you made it into the SEALs, I worried so much I couldn't sleep for weeks. Every deployment, every time the news mentioned something happening somewhere in the world, I wondered if you were there, if you were okay, if I would get that knock on the door. But here's what I never told you. I was also proud prouder than I've ever been of anything. Not because of the medals or the missions or whatever classified stuff you could never talk about. I was proud because you became a man who runs toward danger instead of away from it. You became the kind of person who sees someone in trouble and does something about it. That's rare, son. Most people look away. Most people tell themselves it's not their problem. You were never like that, not even when you were a kid. Remember when you were 8 and you jumped into the creek to save Tommy Mitchell's dog? You couldn't even swim that well yet, and the water was freezing, and your mother nearly had a heart attack. But you jumped in anyway because the dog was drowning and no one else was doing anything. That's who you are. That's who you've always been. And I need you to remember that whatever happens in your life after I'm gone, a man is measured by what he does when no one is looking, by whether he stands up or sits down, by whether he helps or walks away. I know you'll make mistakes. I know there will be times when you're scared and tired and not sure if what you're doing is right. That's okay. That's being human. But don't ever let fear make you into someone you're not. Don't ever let it turn you into a man who looks away. I love you, son. I always have, and I always will, even when I'm not there to say it. Take care of that little girl of yours. Teach her what matters. And remember, the only thing you can control is what you do. Make it count. Dad. Daniel folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. His hands were shaking slightly, but not from cold. He had made his decision. The morning came slowly, gray light seeping through the curtains as Daniel went through the motions of a normal day. Wake Lily, make breakfast, pack her lunch, drive her to school, kiss her forehead and watch her skip through the front doors with her pink backpack bouncing and her blonde hair catching the early sun. The protection detail was subtle but present. Daniel spotted them almost immediately, two people in an unmarked sedan parked half a block from the school, their eyes tracking every vehicle that passed. He gave them a small nod as he drove away, and one of them nodded back. Naval Base San Diego was a sprawling complex of piers and buildings that represented one of the largest concentrations of military power on the West Coast. Daniel had been here many times during his service, though never to the specific building where Admiral Sterling directed him. It was a low, unremarkable structure tucked away in a corner of the base, the kind of place that looked administrative and boring from the outside and probably contained things that would never appear in any official report. He was escorted through security checkpoints and down corridors and finally into a conference room where 6 people waited. Admiral Sterling stood at the head of the table dressed in working khakis rather than the dress blues of his previous visit. Beside him was Rebecca Chen, the FBI agent Daniel had met briefly at the police station. Around the table sat 4 others, each representing a different piece of the interagency puzzle that had been assembled to take down the network. Marcus Webb of NCIS was a tall black man in his early 40s, with the calm intensity of someone who had spent years working cases that required patience and precision. Elena Vasquez from the DEA was younger Latina with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner that suggested she had seen enough to be permanently skeptical of easy answers. Thomas Webb, no relation to Marcus, was a tech specialist with sandy hair and a nervous energy that manifested in constant small movements. Something about the way his eyes darted around the room made Daniel's instincts prickle, though he could not have said exactly why. And finally, Lieutenant Catherine Sterling, the woman Daniel had saved. She looked different in uniform, composed and professional, her brown hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her bearing military precise. But her eyes, when they met his, held something personal beneath the professional surface. Everyone, this is Daniel Hawkins. Admiral Sterling made the introductions with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times. Dan, you know most of the key details already. What you're going to learn today is everything else. The briefing lasted 3 hours. Viktor Kozlov was more connected and more dangerous than Daniel had realized. His legitimate business, Pacific Seafood Imports, was a sprawling operation that brought in millions of dollars worth of seafood from Asia, South America, and the Pacific Islands. It employed hundreds of people, paid its taxes, contributed to local charities, and enjoyed the kind of reputation that made its owner welcome at business association dinners and political fundraisers. Beneath that legitimate surface, according to intelligence gathered over 2 years of investigation, Kozlov ran a parallel operation that used the same shipping networks and logistics infrastructure to move far more valuable cargo. Drugs sometimes, weapons occasionally, and people consistently. The victims were primarily women, though some men had also been taken. They were sourced from various places, some domestic and some international, funneled through a network of safe houses and transport routes that eventually led to buyers overseas. The destinations were varied: Middle East, Eastern Europe, Asia, and the prices were determined by factors that made Daniel feel sick when he read them in the briefing materials. The network had taken at least 7 women from the San Diego area in the past 2 years. Those were the confirmed cases, the ones where disappearances, matched patterns, and evidence pointed toward trafficking rather than voluntary departure. The actual number was almost certainly higher. None of the victims had been recovered. Kate Sterling had stumbled onto the network 3 months ago during a routine inspection at the port of San Diego. A container marked as frozen seafood had shown anomalous thermal readings suggesting the presence of body heat inside. When she had ordered it open, they had found 2 women both dead from cold and dehydration. The container had been addressed to a cold storage facility owned by one of Kozlov's subsidiary companies. But the paperwork had been impeccable, the chain of custody untraceable, and there had been nothing to directly link Kozlov to the deaths. The investigation had continued, but Kate had become a target from that day forward. The attempted kidnapping in the parking lot had been a message, as Admiral Sterling had said, but it had also been an operational failure that was now providing the task force with its best opportunity in 2 years. The 3 men Daniel had captured were talking, trying to negotiate reduced sentences, and while they did not know much about the upper levels of the organization, they knew enough to confirm connections and point toward further leads. Daniel's role in all of this was straightforward in concept and complex in execution. He would establish himself as the owner of a private security firm using a cover identity that the task force had already begun to build. He would attend events where Kozlov was present, cultivate a reputation as someone with military skills and flexible ethics, and eventually work his way into a position where Kozlov might want to hire him. The goal was to get inside the network, gather evidence, and help identify the key players and operational details that had remained hidden from conventional investigation. If successful, the information Daniel gathered would form the basis for federal indictments that would take down the entire organization. If unsuccessful, he would probably be killed. That possibility was not stated directly in the briefing, but it hung in the air, nonetheless, a shadow that everyone could see but no one felt the need to articulate. Questions Admiral Sterling asked when the briefing concluded. Daniel had many questions, but one stood out above the rest. The leak. Kozlov knew about Kate's investigation before the parking lot incident. He knew enough to target her specifically. That suggests someone inside the investigation is feeding him information. The room went quiet. Glances were exchanged between the task force members, the kind of glances that spoke of suspicions already held and conversations already had. Daniel noticed that Thomas Webb's nervous movements had increased, his fingers tapping an irregular rhythm on the table. "We're aware of the possibility," Agent Chen's voice was careful. "We've implemented additional security measures and compartmentalized information to minimize the risk of further leaks. But you haven't identified the source." "Not yet." Daniel looked around the table, his eyes lingering on each face. One of these people might be betraying the others, or the leak might be someone outside this room, a support staff member or a supervisor with access to sensitive information. Or there might be no leak at all, and Kozlov had simply been thorough enough in his surveillance to identify Kate on his own. No way to know. Not yet. "What about my daughter?" Daniel asked. "What happens to Lily while I'm doing this?" "She'll be protected 24 hours a day by a rotating team of federal agents." Admiral Sterling's response was immediate. "If at any point you feel the situation has become too dangerous, you have the option to pull out. We'll relocate you and Lily under new identities if necessary." "That won't be necessary." Daniel's voice was flat. "I'm not going to run from these people. I'm going to help you put them away." Kate Sterling had been silent through most of the briefing, but now she spoke. "Dan, I want to thank you again for what you did. I know this isn't what you signed up for when you stepped in that day." Daniel looked at her. She was composed, professional, everything a naval officer should be. But beneath the surface, he could see the lingering shadow of trauma that the parking lot had left behind. "I didn't think about signing up for anything. I saw someone in trouble and I reacted. That's all. That's exactly why we need you." Kate held his gaze. "Most people would have walked away. You didn't." That makes you different from most people. The briefing ended with logistics and schedules and contact protocols. Daniel was given a secure phone, a cover identity package to memorize, and a timeline that started immediately. His first public appearance as Daniel Hayes, CEO of Pacific Shield Security, would be at a charity gala hosted by Viktor Kozlov in 1 week. Between now and then, he had to become someone else. The days that followed were a blur of preparation and practice. Daniel spent hours memorizing the details of his cover identity, the fictional history of Pacific Shield Security, the names and faces of the key players in San Diego's business community. He practiced casual conversations that were actually intelligence gathering. He rehearsed the body language of a man who had military skills for sale and was looking for the right buyer. Kate worked with him on most of this, her intelligence background, making her an effective instructor in the art of undercover work. They spent long hours together going over scenarios and responses, building the muscle memory of deception that would keep him alive when he was surrounded by people who killed for a living. He learned things about her during those sessions that humanized the naval officer beyond the uniform. She had grown up an only child, her mother dying when she was 12, raised by a father who loved her but struggled to show it in traditional ways. She had joined the Navy partly to follow in his footsteps and partly to prove that she could excel in a world that was still adjusting to the presence of women in combat-adjacent roles. She asked about Lily, and Daniel found himself talking about his daughter in ways he rarely did with anyone. The way she laughed at jokes that were not actually funny. The way she believed absolutely that unicorns were real and simply hiding from people who were not ready to see them. The way she reminded him of Rachel in moments that hit like surprise punches to the heart. Kate did not offer platitudes about loss or time-healing wounds. She simply listened, and in her listening, there was something that felt like understanding. On the third day of preparation, Daniel came home to find an envelope on his kitchen counter. No postmark, no return address, just his name in block letters. Inside was a photograph of Lily walking into school that morning. On the back, written in the same block letters, "Last chance to walk away." Daniel stared at the photograph for a long time. Then he placed a call to Admiral Sterling, reported the message, and went back to memorizing his cover identity. They were trying to scare him into backing down. It was a reasonable strategy given that most people would back down when their children were threatened. But Daniel was not most people, and the threat had the opposite of its intended effect. Every time he looked at that photograph, he saw what would happen if he walked away. Kozlov would continue operating. More women would disappear. And somewhere down the line, maybe next month or next year, or when Lily was a teenager walking home from high school, the network would decide that the loose end represented by Daniel Hawkins needed to be tied off permanently. The only way out was through. The only way to protect his daughter was to eliminate the threat entirely. On the fourth day, Daniel's old teammate called. Mike Torres had served with Daniel in SEAL Team 5 for 8 years, had been beside him on operations that neither of them would ever talk about, had stood as best man at his wedding to Rachel. They had drifted apart after Daniel's discharge, the natural entropy of friendships when geography and circumstances changed, but Mike had reached out after the parking lot incident made local news. "Yo, brother!" Mike's voice carried the same energy it always had, the irrepressible enthusiasm of someone who found life endlessly amusing, even when it was trying to kill him. "Heard you went full action hero in a Target parking lot." "You okay? I'm okay." Daniel was standing on his back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and red. "Lily's fine. What happened?" "The full story, not the sanitized version," Daniel told him. Not everything. He could not talk about the classified parts of the task force operation, but enough. The rescue, the Admiral's visit, the threats against Lily, the decision to help bring down the network. Mike was quiet for a long moment after Daniel finished. "You're walking into a hornet's nest, brother." "I know. With your kid as leverage against you." "I know that too." Another pause. Then Mike's voice came back harder than before. "What do you need?" "I need someone I can trust to have my back if things go sideways." Daniel had not planned to ask this, but the words came out anyway. "Not someone official, someone outside the system." Mike did not hesitate. "I can be there in 24 hours. "Mike, you don't have to, brother." The word carried the weight of a decade of shared experiences, near deaths and celebrations, and the quiet moments in between that built the kind of bond that civilian friendship could never quite match. You were there for me in Fallujah when everything went to hell. You think I'm not going to be there for you now?" Daniel felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he had not realized he was carrying. "This could get ugly. I'm counting on it. Been too peaceful in my life lately. I could use some excitement." Despite everything, Daniel smiled. "Your definition of excitement has always been questionable," says the man who just fought three guys in a parking lot with his kid watching. Fair point. They talk for another hour, working out logistics and contingencies. Mike would arrive in 2 days, establish himself in a rental near Daniel's house, and serve as an unofficial backup layer beyond the protection the task force was providing. He would not be part of any official operation, would not appear in any reports, would simply be a friend visiting from out of town who happened to be one of the most capable combat operators Daniel had ever known. By the time Daniel hung up, he felt more prepared than he had since this whole thing started. The night before the gala, Daniel sat in Lily's room and watched her sleep. Tomorrow night, he would walk into a room full of criminals and pretend to be someone he was not. He would stand face to face with a man who traded in human suffering and try to convince that man that they were cut from the same cloth. He would lie and manipulate and play a role that went against everything he believed, all in service of bringing down people who deserved to be brought down. It was necessary, he believed that. But there was a cost to everything, and he was not sure yet what this would cost him. He pulled a photograph from his pocket. It was old, creased from years of handling, showing a young man in marine fatigues standing next to an older man in work clothes. His father had given him this photo before his first deployment, pressing it into his hands with words that Daniel still remembered. "This was taken the day I shipped out to Vietnam. My father gave it to me for luck, said it would remind me who I was fighting for. I'm giving it to you now for the same reason." Daniel looked at the photo in the dim light. His grandfather, whom he had never met, killed in action 2 months after this picture was taken. His father, who had carried this photo through 2 tours and then through the rest of his life until his heart gave out in a woodworking shop. 3 generations of men who ran toward danger because that was what men in his family did. He leaned down and kissed Lily's forehead, soft enough not to wake her. "I'm doing this for you, Bug. I hope you understand that someday." Then he stood, walked to his own room, and tried to get some sleep before the battle began. The Oceanside Yacht Club gleamed against the darkness of San Diego Bay like a jewel set in black velvet. Luxury cars lined the entrance as valets in crisp uniforms moved with practiced efficiency, and the sound of jazz piano drifted through open doors where San Diego's elite gathered for Victor Kozlov's annual charity gala. Daniel stepped out of a town car that the task force had provided, adjusting the cuffs of a suit that cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. Beside him, Kate Sterling emerged in a black cocktail dress that somehow managed to be both elegant and tactical, the fabric loose enough to allow movement and dark enough to conceal the compact pistol holstered against her thigh. They had rehearsed this 100 times. He was Daniel Hayes, CEO of Pacific Shield Security, a private military contractor looking to expand his business. She was his executive assistant, accompanying him to an event where contacts could be made and deals could be explored. They were professionals attending a professional function, nothing more. "Remember," Kate said quietly as they approached the entrance, her lips barely moving. "Kozlov will test you. He tests everyone. Don't try to impress him. Just be the person we've built." "I know. And don't underestimate him." The charming businessman persona is exactly that, a persona. Underneath it is something much more dangerous. I've met dangerous before. Not like this. Kate's eyes met his. The men you fought in the parking lot were soldiers. Kozlov is a general. The difference matters. They entered the yacht club and were immediately immersed in the particular atmosphere of wealth performing itself. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over guests in designer clothing, their laughter and conversation creating a backdrop of cultivated ease. Waiters in black and white circulated with a champagne and canapes, and a string quartet had replaced the piano in the corner, filling the air with melodies that cost more per hour than most people made in a week. Daniel scanned the room with the automatic threat assessment that years of training had made instinctive. 3 exits visible, security personnel positioned at key points, trying to look like waitstaff, but failing to hide the bulges beneath their jackets. Guest list probably vetted thoroughly, which meant the task force's cover identity had passed whatever scrutiny Kozlov's people had applied. And there in the center of a small group near the windows overlooking the bay stood the man himself. Viktor Kozlov was taller than he had looked in photographs, maybe 6'2", with the posture of someone who expected the world to arrange itself around him. His silver hair was immaculately groomed, his suit was clearly bespoke Italian, and his smile as he spoke to his guests carried the practiced warmth of a man who had learned long ago how to make people feel important. But his eyes told a different story. Gray and cold and constantly moving, they swept the room with the awareness of a predator tracking potential threats. When they landed briefly on Daniel, there was no recognition, but there was something else, a flicker of interest that suggested the new face had registered. "We have his attention." Kate's voice was barely above a whisper. "I noticed." "Good. Now let's give him a reason to keep watching." They moved through the room, Daniel making introductions and small talk, with the ease of someone who had spent years operating in environments where a wrong word could mean death. He was a businessman making connections, nothing more. His handshake was firm, but not challenging. His comments were informed, but not showing off. He projected the image of someone successful enough to be confident, but hungry enough to be looking for opportunities. Throughout it all, he was aware of Kozlov's periodic glances from across the room. The game was working. About an hour into the event, one of Kozlov's security men approached. He was large with the flat face and dead eyes of someone who had done things that precluded empathy. "Mr. Hayes, Mr. Kozlov would like to meet you." Daniel glanced at Kate, then back at the security man. "Lead the way." They were led to a private room on the upper floor of the yacht club, away from the music and laughter of the main event. It was furnished as a study, leather chairs and mahogany bookcases, creating an atmosphere of old money and quiet power. Kozlov stood by the window looking out at the lights of the harbor. "Mr. Hayes," he did not turn around. "I've heard interesting things about you. Good things, I hope." Kozlov turned. Up close, the coldness in his eyes was even more pronounced, the warmth of his smile not reaching them at all. "That depends on your definition of good." Kozlov moved to a sideboard and poured 2 glasses of vodka. "I heard you served in the military. Navy. 12 years. Special operations." Daniel met his gaze without flinching. "Does it matter?" A small smile played at the corners of Kozlov's mouth. "It might. I have use for men with certain skills, men who know how to handle difficult situations with discretion. I run a security company, Mr. Kozlov. Discretion is part of the service." Kozlov handed him one of the vodka glasses. "But your company is young, and the kind of contracts that pay well require a certain reputation, certain connections, which is why I'm here tonight." "Smart." Kozlov sipped his drink. "Tell me, Mr. Hayes, have you ever faced a situation where the rules didn't apply, where you had to make a decision that the law would not approve of?" Daniel thought of the parking lot, of the 3 men he had put in the hospital, of the choice between protecting his daughter and protecting a stranger. "I've been in combat, Mr. Kozlov. Rules are suggestions when survival is on the line." That earned a genuine flicker of interest. "And afterward, when you came home, did the rules feel constraining sometimes?" Kozlov set down his glass and moved closer. There was nothing overtly threatening about his movement, but Daniel's instincts went to full alert nonetheless. "I'm going to be direct with you, Mr. Hayes. I have significant business interests that sometimes require protection, the kind of protection that regular security firms are not equipped to provide. If you are interested in expanding your capabilities, I might be able to help." "What kind of help?" "Contracts, connections, access to the kind of clients who pay very well for very specific services." "And what would you want in return?" Kozlov's smile widened, but his eyes remained cold. "Loyalty, Mr. Hayes. I value loyalty above all else. The men who work with me are rewarded generously. The men who betray me are not." The threat was elegant in its understatement. Daniel held the gaze. "I don't betray people who deal fairly with me. Then we understand each other." Kozlov stepped back, the moment of intensity passing. "Enjoy the rest of the party, Mr. Hayes. My people will be in touch to discuss opportunities." Daniel and Kate left the private room and made their way back to the main event. Neither of them spoke until they were outside walking toward the town car, their breath misting in the cool night air. He took the bait. Kate's voice was controlled, but there was an undercurrent of excitement, maybe too easily. Daniel frowned. He didn't ask any hard questions, didn't verify anything I said, just offered me a job. "What are you thinking I'm thinking?" He already knows who I am. Daniel looked back at the yacht club where lights still blazed and music still played. I'm thinking that whole conversation was a test to see how I would react. Kate considered this. If he knows, why not just have you killed? Why play games because killing a former SEAL who just became a local hero creates problems? Questions get asked. Investigations get opened. Daniel's mind was racing, fitting pieces together. But recruiting that same person, neutralizing them by making them part of the organization, that's smarter. That's what a general would do. So what do? We keep playing the game. Daniel's jaw tightened. But we play it knowing that he's playing too. The ride back to the base was silent. When they arrived, Admiral Sterling was waiting. How did it go? Daniel told him everything, including his suspicions about Kozlov's awareness. The Admiral listened without interruption, his face giving nothing away. If you're right, Sterling said when Daniel finished, then we're in a more dangerous position than we thought, but also potentially a more advantageous one. How so? If Kozlov knows who you are and still wants to recruit you, it means he thinks he can use you. Turn you, that's a vulnerability we can exploit, but only if we're smarter than he is. And if we're not, Sterling's eyes were hard. Then this operation fails and people die. Possibly including you. Daniel thought about Lily dreaming peacefully in her bed. I understand the stakes, sir. I know you do, Chief. That's why I chose you. The weeks that followed were a careful dance of approach and retreat. Kozlov's people reached out as promised, with offers of small contracts that allowed Daniel to prove his reliability. Security for a warehouse, protection for a shipment. Nothing overtly illegal, nothing that could be used as evidence, but each job brought him deeper into Kozlov's orbit. He met more of the key players. Dmitry Volkov, Kozlov's head of security, a former Russian special forces operator with dead eyes and efficient violence in every movement. Natasha Petrova, who managed the legitimate seafood business, and probably much more besides. A rotating cast of lieutenants and enforcers whose names and faces Daniel memorized and reported back to the task force. The intelligence he gathered was valuable but not damning. Kozlov was too careful to involve his new recruit in anything that could be used against him. Daniel was being tested, evaluated. His loyalty assessed through tasks that increased gradually in sensitivity, but never crossed the line into prosecutable territory. Mike Torres arrived as planned and established himself in a rental house 3 blocks from Daniel's. To anyone watching, he was an old military buddy visiting for an extended stay. In reality, he was Daniel's escape route if everything went wrong. Lily adapted to the new normal with the resilience of children. She knew that Daddy had important work to do and that there were nice people watching their house to keep them safe. She did not know the details, and Daniel intended to keep it that way for as long as possible. But there were moments late at night when she had bad dreams, when she would crawl into his bed and press her face against his chest and whisper questions that broke his heart. Daddy, are the bad men going to come back? No, Bug. Daddy won't let them. Promise, I promise. It was a promise he was not entirely sure he could keep, but he made it anyway because that was what fathers did. 3 weeks into the operation, the situation escalated in a way Daniel had not anticipated. He was picking Lily up from school, standing outside his Ford F-150 and watching the stream of children pour through the front doors, when his instincts triggered a warning that had nothing to do with conscious thought. A black sedan sat at the corner of the street, 2 men visible through the windshield. They were not parents, they were not teachers, and they were watching him with the focused intensity of professionals on a job. Kozlov's people, testing him, pressuring him, reminding him that they could reach his daughter whenever they chose. Daniel's jaw tightened. He forced himself to remain calm as Lily emerged from the school, her pink backpack bouncing, her face lighting up when she saw him. Daddy. Hey, Bug. He scooped her up, kissing her cheek while his eyes never left the sedan. How was school? Good. We learned about dinosaurs today. Did you know some of them had feathers? I did know that. Daniel opened the truck door and buckled her into her booster seat. Pretty cool, right? The coolest. He climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled away from the school. In his rearview mirror, the black sedan pulled out and followed. Daniel's mind raced through options. He could lead them on a chase, try to lose them in traffic. He could call the task force and request backup. He could go home and hope they were only observing. Or he could end this now. He made a decision. Bug, we're going to take a little detour. Okay, Daddy needs to check on something. Okay, Daddy. He drove through familiar streets, then turned onto a road that led to an industrial area on the outskirts of Oceanside. Abandoned warehouses, empty parking lots, no witnesses. The sedan followed, maintaining a careful distance. Daniel pulled into the lot of a defunct auto parts factory, its windows dark and its fences rusted. He parked the truck, turned to Lily, and spoke in the calm, steady voice she had learned to trust it absolutely. Bug, I need you to stay in the truck. No matter what happens, do not get out. Do not unlock the doors. If anyone other than me tries to get in, you lie down on the floor and cover your ears. Can you do that for Daddy? Lily's eyes were wide, but she nodded. Her hand found the stuffed unicorn beside her and clutched it tightly. I can do it, Daddy. That's my brave girl. Daniel stepped out of the truck and locked the doors behind him. The black sedan had stopped 30 yards away, and now both doors opened. Two men emerged. One was tall and thin with the wiry build of a street fighter. The other was shorter but heavier, carrying his weight in his shoulders and arms like a former wrestler. Both moved with the confidence of men who were used to intimidating others. Mr. Hawkins. The tall one spoke, his accent faintly Eastern European. Mr. Kozlov sends his regards. Daniel walked toward them, his gait relaxed but his body coiled for action. If Kozlov has something to say to me, he can say it himself. Mr. Kozlov is a busy man. The shorter one cracked his knuckles. He wanted us to deliver a message. What message? That he values loyalty. The tall one reached behind his back, producing a knife that glinted in the afternoon sun. And that disloyalty has consequences. They moved in unison, the tall one circling left, while the shorter one advanced directly. It was a practiced maneuver designed to divide attention and create openings. Daniel had seen variations of this approach 100 times in training and a dozen times in combat. He knew exactly how to break it. He did not wait for them to close the distance. Instead, he moved forward directly at the shorter man, turning the encirclement into a one-on-one engagement. The shorter man threw a heavy punch aimed at Daniel's jaw. Daniel sidestepped, caught the arm, and used the man's momentum to spin him around. Before the shorter man could recover, Daniel drove his elbow into the base of his skull. The impact was precise and devastating. The man dropped like a marionette with cut strings. The tall one lunged with the knife, a slashing attack aimed at Daniel's midsection. Daniel pivoted, letting the blade pass inches from his stomach, then stepped inside the man's guard. His left hand trapped the knife arm at the wrist. His right hand came up in a palm strike to the chin that snapped the man's head back. The knife clattered to the ground. Daniel swept the man's legs and drove him face first into the asphalt, then dropped a knee onto his spine to pin him in place. Tell Kozlov this. Daniel's voice was low and hard, each word a promise. If anyone comes near my daughter again, I won't be having a conversation. I'll be digging graves. Do you understand? The man beneath him groaned something that might have been assent. Daniel stood, collected the knife, and walked back to his truck. Through the window, he could see Lily still sitting in her booster seat, her face pale but her eyes dry. She had done exactly what he asked. He unlocked the door and climbed in. Is everything okay, Daddy? Her voice was small. Everything's fine, Bug. Daniel started the engine, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Those men won't be bothering us anymore. Were they bad guys? Yes, Bug, they were bad guys. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You beat them, didn't you? Like you beat the men who were hurting that lady. Daniel looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror. Her eyes held no fear, only the absolute trust of a child who believed her father could protect her from anything. Yes, Bug. I beat them. Good. She went back to playing with her unicorn, and Daniel drove home, knowing that the stakes had just gotten higher. That night, he called Kate. Kozlov sent men after me. They approached while I was picking up Lily from school. Kate's voice went sharp with alarm. Are you okay? Is Lily okay? We're fine. I dealt with it. Daniel paused. But this changes things. He's not just testing me anymore. He's putting pressure on me, trying to force my hand. He wants you to commit. Kate's voice was thoughtful. He wants you to do something that compromises you, something he can hold over you. Exactly. Daniel looked out the window at the quiet street, wondering how many eyes were watching. So we give him what he wants. What do you mean? I stop playing defense. I go to Kozlov and I tell him I'm ready to do whatever it takes to prove my loyalty. I push for a bigger role, a deeper involvement. The sooner I get inside, the sooner we can end this. That's incredibly dangerous. I know, but those men were 30 feet from my daughter today. Daniel's voice hardened. Every day this continues is another day she's at risk. I'm done waiting. Kate was silent for a long moment. Then she said, I'll talk to my father, set up a meeting with Kozlov. But Dan, once you cross this line, there's no going back. I know. I'm ready. The meeting with Kozlov took place 3 days later in the same private room at the yacht club where they had first spoken. Mr. Hawkins, Kozlov's greeting was warmer than before, his smile more genuine. I heard you had an interesting encounter with some of my employees. Your employees needed a lesson in manners. Daniel's voice was flat, and I needed to understand where I stand. And where do you stand? Daniel met his eyes without flinching. I stand where the money is. You want loyalty. I can give you loyalty. But I need to know that working for you is worth the risk. That means bigger jobs, better pay, a real place in your organization, not these test runs you've been feeding me. Kozlov studied him for a long moment. Then he laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face from cold predator to charming businessman. I like you, Mr. Hawkins. You have courage. Most men would have run to the police after what happened. You came to me instead. The police can't protect my daughter. Daniel let the truth of that statement show in his eyes. But you can. Yes, Kozlov nodded slowly. I can. He walked to the window looking out at the harbor lights. I have a shipment arriving in 3 days. Special cargo that requires special handling. This is the job you've been asking for, Mr. Hawkins. The job that will prove whether you truly belong in my organization. What kind of cargo? Kozlov turned to face him. The kind that pays very well and asks no questions? Daniel understood. This was it. The moment that would take him across a line that could never be uncrossed. I'm in. Kozlov's smile widened. Welcome to the family. The container ship arrived on a moonless night, its massive hull looming against the darkness of the bay like a floating mountain. Daniel stood at the edge of the pier with Dmitry Volkov beside him, watching the cranes swing a specific container down toward the waiting truck. This is your responsibility now. Volkov's voice was flat. Mr. Kozlov is counting on you. I understand. The container landed on the truck bed with a metallic groan. Daniel climbed into the cab beside the driver, his mind racing through the plan he had coordinated with the task force. The intercept was supposed to happen at a checkpoint 12 miles from the port where Kate's team would stage what appeared to be a rival criminal organization's robbery. The confusion would allow the victims to be extracted while making it look like Daniel had been caught in circumstances beyond his control. But as the truck rolled through the industrial maze of the port, things began to go wrong. The radio crackled with Volkov's voice. Route compromised. Take alternate path 7. The driver confirmed and wrenched the wheel, turning down a road that Daniel did not recognize. Where does this lead? Daniel kept his voice casual. Safe house in El Cajon. The driver did not look at him. 30 minutes. El Cajon, a location the task force had not identified. Daniel pulled out his phone, pretending to check messages while actually sending a brief text to Kate. New destination, El Cajon. Adjusting. The response came within seconds. Copy. Standing by. The rest of the drive passed in tense silence. Then Daniel heard a sound from behind them from inside the container. Muffled voices, crying, human cargo. His hands clenched into fists, but he forced himself to remain still. He could not save them by acting now. The larger operation depended on patience, on playing the long game, on trusting that the task force would find a way to adapt. The safe house turned out to be a large warehouse surrounded by chain-link fence. The truck pulled through a gate and into a loading bay where several of Kozlov's men waited. The container was opened, and the cargo emerged into the harsh fluorescent light. 12 women, shiz ranging from late teens to early 30s. Different ethnicities, different backgrounds, united only by the terror in their eyes and the zip ties around their wrists. Daniel watched them being led into the warehouse, cataloging faces, counting guards, noting every detail. One of the women looked at him as she passed, her eyes meeting his for just a moment. Hope. She thought he might be there to help. He held her gaze as long as he dared, trying to communicate silently that she was not wrong. Then she was gone, disappearing into the building with the others. Daniel spent the next hour maintaining his cover while his phone buzzed silently with updates from Kate. The task force was mobilizing, repositioning assets, planning a new approach. but they needed time. Hold position if you can. Extraction plan for 0400. Maintain cover until then. 4 in the morning. 6 hours away. 6 hours of watching those women locked in rooms of pretending to be one of the monsters who had put them there. At midnight, Volkov arrived with news that changed everything. Mr. Kozlov wants to see you. Now. The drive to Kozlov's estate took 45 minutes. Daniel was led into the same study where they had first discussed business, but the atmosphere was different now. Heavier. More dangerous. Kozlov stood by the window, a glass of vodka in hand. Mr. Hawkins, or should I say Mr. Hayes, or perhaps I should use your real name, Daniel Hawkins, former Navy SEAL Team 5. Daniel's blood went cold, but his training kept his expression neutral. Kozlov turned, holding up a photograph of Daniel in his Navy dress uniform. You see, I investigate everyone who enters my world. The question is, what do I do with what I've learned? The conversation that followed was a careful dance of threats and offers. Kozlov knew about Daniel's true identity. He knew about the task force. He knew about the planned extraction at 0400. He had a mole inside the investigation. I'm offering you a choice. Kozlov's voice was almost gentle. Continue working against me and watch your daughter grow up an orphan. Or accept my offer, work for me genuinely and live a very comfortable life. Daniel's mind raced. If Kozlov knew about the extraction, those women were walking into a trap. Kate was walking into a trap. He needed time, needed to warn them. I need to think about it. You have until dawn. Kozlov smiled. Choose wisely. The moment Daniel was clear of Kozlov's estate, he called Kate. Abort the extraction, it's a trap. Kozlov has a mole in the task force. Kate's response was sharp with controlled panic. Are you certain he showed me classified photos from my file? He knew details about the operation that only someone inside could have provided. Silence. Then reluctantly, I'll abort. But Dan, those women? I know. Daniel's voice was hard. I'll find a way to keep them alive. Just find the mole. 2 weeks. That was how long it took. 2 weeks of playing double agent, pretending to consider Kozlov's offer while secretly feeding information to the task force. 2 weeks of finding excuses to visit the warehouse, to bring water and food to the women, to keep them alive and hope they understood that help was coming. 2 weeks of watching Lily every morning, kissing her goodbye, wondering if this would be the day everything fell apart. The task force set traps, fed false information to different team members, watched for patterns. It was Kate who finally made the connection. Thomas Webb. Her voice crackled through the secure phone line. He's been selling us out for over a year. Daniel thought of the tech specialist's nervous energy, his darting eyes, his constant small movements. The instinct that had prickled at their first meeting had been right. What happens now? Webb is being arrested as we speak, and we're planning a new operation. One he doesn't know about. We hit Kozlov in 3 days. The women first priority. Kate's voice was firm. We get them out, then we take down everything else. 3 days. The night before the operation, Daniel stood in Lily's doorway watching her sleep. Tomorrow would determine everything. Tomorrow he would either succeed in bringing down Kozlov and the network, or he would die trying. He thought of his father's letter, of the words that had guided him this far. The only thing you can control is what you do. Make it count. He intended to. The dawn came, gray and cold fog rolling in from the Pacific to blanket San Diego in a shroud that seemed fitting for what was about to happen. Daniel stood at the window of the task force command center, watching the mist swirl through the streets below. Behind him, the room buzzed with controlled chaos. Tactical teams checked weapons and equipment. Communications specialists ran final tests on encrypted channels. Admiral Sterling stood at the central table with Kate and Agent Chen, reviewing the operation plan. Mike Torres had arrived the night before, having received a coded message from Daniel that it was time. He was positioned half a mile from the warehouse on a rooftop with a clear view of the escape tunnel that Kozlov would likely use if things went wrong. The plan is straightforward. Sterling pointed at the warehouse diagram. Dan enters first using his established access. He disables the security system and opens the main entrance for the tactical teams. Alpha team secures the hostages. Bravo team handles the guards. Charlie team sweeps for evidence. And Kozlov, Daniel asked, if he's on site, we take him alive if possible. Sterling's voice hardened. But the priority is the hostages. Everything else is secondary. What about the tunnel? Kate answered. Mike Torres is covering that exit. If Kozlov runs, he won't get far. Daniel nodded. Having Mike there made him feel more confident about the operation's success. His old teammate was one of the best shooters he had ever known. One more thing. Sterling looked around the room. This ends today. 2 years of investigation, dozens of victims, countless hours of work. Today we shut them down for good. The team dispersed to their positions. Daniel found himself alone with Kate. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. "Ready as I'll ever be." Kate reached out and touched his arm. "Be careful in there, you too." They walked out together into the fall and whatever waited on the other side. The warehouse loomed out of the mist like a sleeping giant. Daniel approached from the east, walking with the casual confidence of someone who belonged there. His credentials cleared him through the outer security without incident. Inside the building was quiet. Most of Kozlov's men were still asleep or stationed at positions the task force had carefully mapped. Daniel moved through familiar corridors, nodding to the guards he passed. The security control room was on the second floor. One man sat at the console watching screens that showed empty hallways. "Morning." Daniel kept his voice casual. "Kozlov wants the system down for maintenance." The guard frowned. "I didn't get any orders about that." "Check your phone." The guard reached for his phone and Daniel struck. A precise blow to the nerve cluster at the base of the skull. The guard slumped forward unconscious. Daniel turned to the security console, entering codes he had memorized weeks ago. One by one, the cameras went dark. The alarm system powered down. The electronic locks on the main doors clicked open. He sent a single word to Kate. "Green." Somewhere outside, tactical teams began to move. The next few minutes were controlled chaos. Doors being breached, commands being shouted, the warehouse waking up to the nightmare that had arrived. Daniel moved through the building toward the holding rooms. 2 guards rounded a corner ahead of him. They saw his weapon and their expression shifted from surprise to violence. Daniel was faster. The first guard went down with a shot to the shoulder. The second raised his own gun, but Daniel was already closing the distance. An elbow strike to the throat, a knee to the groin, a final blow to the temple. 6 seconds. 2 threats neutralized. He kept moving. The holding rooms were at the end of a long corridor. Daniel pulled out the key he had copied during his time inside. The first door opened. 6 women huddled against the far wall, their eyes wide with terror that shifted to confusion when they saw Daniel's face. "Federal operation. You're being rescued. Stay here until someone in tactical gear comes to get you." He moved to the second door, then the third. 12 women now free of their cells. But there was one more thing he needed to do. Kozlov's office was on the 3rd floor. Daniel climbed the stairs with his weapon ready, stepping over the bodies of guards who had chosen the wrong side. The door was open. Kozlov stood at the window watching the chaos below. Tactical teams swarmed the loading bay. Gunfire echoed from somewhere in the building. He turned when Daniel entered, and his face held something close to resignation. "Mr. Hawkins, I suppose I should have known." "You should have known a lot of things." Daniel kept his weapon trained on Kozlov's chest. "It's over." "Is it?" Kozlov smiled faintly. "You've won this battle, but the war continues. There are others who will take my place, maybe, but you won't be providing anything anymore." Kozlov regarded him for a long moment. "You could have joined me. You could have been wealthy. Your daughter would have wanted for nothing. My daughter already has everything she needs. She has a father who looks at himself in the mirror and doesn't see a monster." Something flickered in Kozlov's eyes. Recognition, perhaps. "You think you're different from me?" Kozlov moved away from the window. "You think the violence you commit is justified because it serves a righteous cause. But violence is violence. The blood on your hands does not wash off." Daniel felt the truth in those words, the part of them he did not want to acknowledge. "Maybe you're right, but there's a difference between us you'll never understand. And what is that? I don't enjoy it." The moment stretched between them. Then Kozlov moved. He was fast, his hands shooting toward his jacket for a hidden weapon. But Daniel was faster, the reflexes of 1,000 training hours, responding before conscious thought could intervene. The shot echoed through the room. Kozlov staggered backward, a red bloom spreading across his chest. He looked down at the wound with something like surprise, then back up at Daniel. "Well played." The words came out as a whisper. "Perhaps you are different after all." He collapsed. Daniel stood over him, watching the life fade from those cold gray eyes. At that moment, his radio crackled. Dan, it's Mike. Someone just came out of that tunnel. Older guy, silver hair, expensive suit. He's running. Daniel felt a jolt of confusion. Kozlov was lying dead at his feet. Who else would be using the escape tunnel? Stop him. Already on it, brother. Through the radio, Daniel heard a brief scuffle, then Mike's voice again. Got him. You're going to want to see this. 20 minutes later, Daniel stood in the drainage culvert half a mile from the warehouse, looking at the man Mike had captured. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than most people made in a month. His face was unfamiliar, but the cold intelligence in his eyes was unmistakable. This isn't Kozlov, Mike said. So who the hell is he? The man smiled, revealing teeth that were too perfect. Too white. My name is Alexei Petrov. I am, how do you say, Kozlov's silent partner. Daniel felt the pieces clicking together. Kozlov had been the face of the network, but not its true head. Someone else had been pulling the strings all along. You're the one who set up the mole. Daniel's voice was hard. You're the one who knew about every operation before it happened. Petrov shrugged. Thomas Webb was a useful asset, expensive but useful. And now, Mr. Hawkins, you have a choice. Petrov's smile widened. Kill me, and another will take my place. The network is larger than you can imagine. Or let me go, and perhaps we can reach an arrangement that benefits us both. Daniel raised his weapon. You're right about one thing. Violence doesn't wash off. He lowered the weapon and looked at Mike. Cuff him. He's going to spend the rest of his life answering questions. Petrov's smile faltered. You're making a mistake. No, Daniel turned away. I'm making a choice. That's different. The aftermath took hours. Medical teams treating the wounded, evidence technicians cataloging horrors. 12 women evacuated to hospitals where counselors waited to begin the long process of healing. Daniel gave his statement to a dozen different officials answering the same questions until the words lost meaning. Yes, he had shot Kozlov. Yes, it had been self-defense. Yes, he understood there would be an investigation. Kate found him sitting on the loading dock as the sun finally burned through the fog. The women are safe. Her voice was quiet. All 12 of them. Daniel nodded. He should have felt triumph. Instead, he felt hollow. Hey, Kate touched his arm. You did good today. I killed a man today. You stopped a monster. Kate's voice was firm. There's a difference, is there? Kate was silent for a moment. Then she turned to face him. I watched you these past weeks. I watched you bring water to those women when no one was looking. I watched you risk your cover to make sure they had food. I watched you carry the weight of this operation without breaking. She took his hand. That's how I know who you are. Because in all the darkness, you never stopped being someone who cared. Daniel looked at their joined hands. Thank you. Thank me by going home to your daughter. Kate smiled. She's probably wondering where her dad is. Lily, the thought of her cut through the emptiness, filling the hollow space with something warm. Come with me. What? Come meet her. Daniel was surprised by his own words, but they felt right. She's heard me talk about you. Kate hesitated, then smiled. I'd like that. They walked out of the warehouse together into the sunlight. 1 week later, Daniel stood in the quiet of Miramar National Cemetery, looking down at his father's grave. The headstone was simple. William Hawkins, beloved husband and father, Vietnam veteran. Daniel had not been here since the funeral 6 years ago. The pain had been too fresh then, too raw to face. Now finally he was ready. Hey Dad, his voice was soft. I know it's been a while. He knelt, placing a small American flag at the base of the headstone. A lot has happened since you have been gone. Rachel died. I left the Navy, raised Lily on my own best I could, made a lot of mistakes along the way. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But I remembered what you told me, about standing up instead of sitting down, about helping instead of walking away, about being measured by what you do when no one's looking. The wind rustled through the grass, carrying the faint sound of taps from somewhere across the cemetery. I hope I made you proud, Dad. I hope you can see that I tried to be the man you raised me to be. He stood brushing dirt from his knees. Lily's doing great, by the way. She's 8 now, smart as a whip, looks just like her mother. You would have loved her, Dad. She would have loved you too. He touched the headstone gently. I'll come back more often, I promise. Then he turned and walked away, carrying with him the memory of his father's words. The only thing you can control is what you do. Make it count. 6 months later, Daniel stood at a podium in a hotel ballroom, looking out at a crowd of faces that represented everything he had worked to build. The Guardian Foundation had started as an idea, a way to help veterans like himself find purpose after their military careers ended. It had grown into something more, a network of training programs and support services that helped former soldiers transition into civilian life. The room was filled with the first graduating class, 30 men and women who had served their country and struggled to find their place afterward. 30 people who now had skills and opportunities and hope. Admiral Sterling sat in the front row. Kate sat beside him, her smile visible, even from the podium. And next to Kate, bouncing with barely contained energy, was Lily. Mike Torres was there too, having flown in from Virginia for the occasion. He sat in the back row, grinning like a proud uncle. When I left the Navy 3 years ago, Daniel began, I thought my life of service was over. I thought the skills I had learned no longer had a place in the world I was returning to. I was wrong. He looked out at the faces before him. Service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. It transforms. The discipline, the courage, the willingness to put others before yourself, these things don't disappear. They become the foundation for a different kind of service. He met Lily's eyes. Someone once told me that a man is measured by what he does when no one is looking, by whether he stands up or sits down, by whether he helps or walks away. He paused. Every person in this room has chosen to stand up. You've chosen to help. You've chosen to continue serving, not because someone is watching, but because that's who you are. Applause filled the room. Later after the ceremony, Daniel found himself on the hotel balcony with Kate. The San Diego skyline glittered before them. You were good up there. Kate leaned against the railing. I think you found your calling. Maybe. It feels different than I expected. Different how, when I was in the teams, everything was clear. Good guys and bad guys. Now it's messier, more complicated, but also more meaningful. Kate moved closer. I know, and Lily knows, and the people you've helped know. That's not invisible, Dan. That's legacy. He turned to look at her. Kate, he said her name softly. Thank you for everything. She reached up and touched his face. You were never lost. You were just finding your way. He leaned into her touch. Lily asked me something this morning. What? She asked if you were going to be her new mom. Kate's breath caught. Dan, I told her I didn't know, that it was too early, but I also told her that you were someone very special to me. Kate was quiet for a moment. What do you want, Dan? He looked at her. I want to find out what we could be. I want to see where this goes. And I want Lily to grow up knowing that love doesn't end when you lose someone. It just transforms. Kate smiled. I think I'd like that too. The door behind them burst open and Lily charged onto the balcony. Daddy, can we go get ice cream now? You promised? Daniel laughed, scooping her up. I did promise, didn't I? You did. And Kate has to come too. Kate pretended to think about it. Well, if you're asking that nicely, I suppose I could make an exception. Lily cheered, grabbing both their hands. Come on, the ice cream place closes in an hour. She dragged them toward the door, and Daniel let himself be pulled along. This was what he had fought for. This moment, this feeling, the warmth of his daughter's hand in his, the presence of a woman who had become more than he ever expected. He thought of his father's letter one last time. The only thing you can control is what you do. Make it count. He intended to keep making it count for as long as he had breath in his body and love in his heart. The ice cream shop was crowded with families. Daniel sat in a booth with Lily on one side and Kate on the other, watching his daughter devour a sundae almost as big as her head. Daddy, Kate says she's never been to Disneyland. Lily's voice carried outrage. Can we take her? Kate shot Daniel a helpless look. Please, Lily turned her full charm on both of them. It would be so fun, Daniel met Kate's eyes. What do you think? Kate smiled. I think that's something that should be corrected. Lily's shriek of joy drew the attention of everyone in the shop. Thank you, thank you, thank you. She launched herself at Kate, and Daniel watched them embrace his daughter and the woman he was falling in love with. They were going to be okay. All of them, together, outside the California sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. A perfect ending to a long journey. But also Daniel knew a beginning, a new chapter, a new life, and he was ready for it.